Well, people have a lot of reasons and excuses for their decisions to reject God. See, if you go to school or work with people who don't know Jesus, then you've heard a lot of them. If you aren't really sure about God, this might even represent your way of thinking. You think things like, I don't need God. I'm doing just fine. I'm going to make time for God later, but right now, I'm going to do my own thing. Really, Christianity is too restrictive. I don't buy into the holy one way to heaven thing. I think that there's got to be other ways. Well, if I become a Christian, that means that I'm going to have to give up too many things, and I just want to have fun. Or, I can't believe that a loving God would send people to hell. Who wants to serve a God like that? I mean, if God really loved people, then everyone would go to heaven. See, people have a lot of questions and doubts and misunderstandings about God. But you see, I believe that this is the biggest one of all. This is the question that people who don't know Jesus wrestle with. And to be honest, I think that this is a question that even those who do know Jesus wrestle with. It's a tough one that preachers have a tendency to avoid because it isn't an easy or popular subject. Why do bad things happen to good people? Have you ever heard somebody ask that before? Why do bad things happen to good people? And so people have questions like, why did my wife get cancer? She's been a Christian her entire life. Why her? How could God let my child die after all that I've done for him? She's such a good lady. Why did God let her lose her husband? Why did I lose my job? How could God let that happen? Why didn't he stop it somehow? Why do bad things keep happening? And why do bad things happen to good people? And so because they aren't sure of the answer, people are filled with resentment, bitterness, and anger. They blame God and they say things like, if this is what I get for loving and serving God and giving my time and my money, then I'm not sure that I want to do it anymore. All the things that people tell you. You know what I'm talking about, the Christian cliches that people spew out in those situations. They don't really help, do they? In fact, most of the time they make the situations worse. You know what I'm talking about. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Anybody ever heard that? Well, a bullet in the arm doesn't make you stronger. It's always darkest right before dawn. Here's the problem. That's bad science. This too shall pass. I'll be honest, I think the only time that is ever encouraging is if they've got a kidney stone. This builds character. Look, you don't understand. I've got all the character I want. Thank you very much. Well, God never gives you more than you can handle. Now, while that sounds good, it's not actually biblical. See, people use those cliches because they're not really sure what the answer is and they don't know what to say. Why do bad things happen to good people? Is it reasonable to expect that if you love God, if you pray, if you treat people right, and you give your money, that things are going to go right, that you're going to be employed and healthy and happy and blessed, that you're going to be healthy until you're 85 and then die in your sleep and go off to heaven? Right? Is that a reasonable expectation? If bad things happen, why? What's going on? Is there some other agenda at work? I want to look with you at a moment in the life of a Bible character named Joseph. Even if you haven't read the Bible, then you've probably heard of Joseph because of either a movie or a Broadway show. If you've heard the story 100 times or if you've never heard it, I'm going to give you a very quick overview. I encourage you to go back and read it. It's found in Genesis chapter 37. It's a great story. You see, Joseph was his father's favorite son. He had a beautiful, colorful coat. It was a gift from his father to prove that he was the favorite. And as you might imagine, his brothers didn't like that at all. And so Joseph had two dreams where his brothers bowed down and he served them. In a very not wise moment, Joseph shared those dreams with his brothers, who grew to absolutely hate him. Joseph's brothers couldn't forgive or even tolerate him. And so one day while they were out taking care of the cattle, they decided that they were going to kill him. And they tore off that stupid coat and they threw Joseph down into a well. At the last second, a not so merciful decision, instead of killing Joseph, they decided to sell him. They trafficked their own brother. And Joseph was sold and then resold and ended up a slave in Egypt. From there, for Joseph, life was a roller coaster. Joseph was a faithful and trusted servant. He climbed the organizational ladder and ended up in charge of the household of a guy named Potiphar, a high official. But then Potiphar's wife falsely accused Joseph of trying to seduce her. And so, rightly so, Potiphar got mad, and Joseph was thrown into prison for several years. Now, while in prison, Joseph had a lot of time to think about his brothers and what they had done. I can only imagine how he must have had to fought the anger and the bitterness and the desire for revenge. Then, through a miraculous set of circumstances, Joseph was released from prison at the age of 30 and was elevated to the number 2 man in the nation of Egypt, which was the most powerful nation in all of the world. See, Joseph's journey from being sold to being a national leader took 13 years. 13 years. See, Joseph's plan to store food during the abundant years positioned Egypt to be the only nation in the world with food during a worldwide famine. And so Joseph's dream of his brothers bowing down before him came true. His brothers came to Egypt and asked him for food, and they didn't know that the guy that they were asking, who held their fate in their hands, was their brother Joseph. See, they didn't recognize their own brother. And Joseph didn't tell him who he was. He gave them food and he sent them home, but he kept one brother as kind of a ransom so that they would come back and prove that they weren't spies. And so finally the brothers were before him again, pleading for food and the release of their brother, and they still didn't know that the person that they were asking for help was the brother that they sold into slavery. It was Joseph's big chance to get even. But instead of punishing his brothers, Joseph chose to forgive. Now, that is a very quick recounting of that story. Now, let's slow it down, and I want to go through it, and I want to go through all the bad things that happened in Joseph's life. See, it's important to know that Joseph loved God, he served God, and he pleased God. And in fact, repeatedly throughout this story, you read the line, the Lord was with Joseph. See, God gave Joseph a dream. He shared it, and everyone that he shared it with hated him. Joseph was beat up by his brothers, and his prized possession, a gift from his father, was destroyed. Joseph was thrown into an empty well and left there to die. Then he was sold as a slave, and then he was sold again, but this time to the enemy. Joseph was separated from his family, and his father thought that he was dead. Joseph was betrayed by his brothers. He was falsely accused of trying to seduce his boss's wife, and then he was thrown into prison. In prison, Joseph made friends with people that when they were released, they said that they would help him get released. But when they got out, they promptly forgot him. And Joseph spent 2 more years in an Egyptian prison with no friends, no family, and no hope. Listen, if there was ever a guy that had the right to be bitter and angry at God, it was Joseph. Even though he was a good guy who loved God with all of his heart, lots of bad things kept happening in his life. So one day, Joseph finally decided that he had had enough. He stepped outside, he shook his fist at God and made an angry declaration. He said, that's it, no more. I'm not going to love you. I'm not going to serve you. If this is what it means to follow God, then I am done. I am a good person and bad things keep happening to me. I'm through with you, God. Now, that's what you'd expect, right? But that's not what happened. And the reality on some level, I don't know that you could really blame Joseph. After all, he did have it pretty bad. But you see, that's not what Joseph said or did. Instead, Joseph's powerful response provides us with a glimpse, a clue into the answer of one of life's most difficult questions. Why do bad things happen to good people? See, when your world is crashing in, when bad things seem to be piling up and stacking on top of each other, and you're wondering, why me? This story, in Joseph's words, I believe will help you to have a completely different perspective. You see, when Joseph finally revealed his true identity to his brothers, Joseph's words, when Joseph revealed himself and his true identity to his brothers, because he did that, his brothers were now frightened and scared that he was going to punish them and maybe even have them killed. But instead, Joseph did something different. He revealed unusual insight into everything bad that had happened to him. See, apparently during all of those years of slavery, captivity, and prison, Joseph considered the question, why does this keep happening to me? So we pick up the story today in Genesis 45, verse 4, and Joseph is talking to his brothers. And now, do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save the lives that God sent me ahead of you. Well, wait a second. God sent me? God sent me ahead of you? God didn't send him. His brothers sold him. But you see, that's no longer how Joseph saw it. For 2 years now, there has been a famine in the land. And for the next 5 years, there will not be plowing or reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve you for a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. See, there it is again. God sent me. Wow. Instead of saying, you sold me here to get rid of me, he said, God sent me here to save your life. So then it was not you who sent me, but God. Isn't that unbelievable? For the third time, Joseph said, it wasn't you that sent me here. I was mad. I looked back, and it didn't look fair. But now on this side of things, looking back at everything that has happened, I can see it wasn't you who sent me here. God sent me here. See, you can look at all the bad things that happened to Joseph, and you can reasonably decide that his brothers did it to him, that Potiphar's wife was responsible, that the Egyptians did it, right? That's your natural assumption when things go wrong. It's an attack of the enemy. You think things like, there's no way I can survive this. Where is God when I need him? How am I ever going to make it? Why is God allowing this? Why do bad things happen to good people? Why do bad things happen to me? But Joseph said, God did it. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler of Egypt. He said, God sent me here for a purpose, to save your lives and to rule. Hey guys, you remember that dream that I had? The one where you all bowed down to me? See, you didn't know it at the time, but when you sold me as a slave, that was a part of it. That was the beginning of the dream, God's dream that's coming true. Joseph continued to his brothers, now hurry back to my father and say to him, this is what your son Joseph says. God has made me Lord of all of Egypt. And for the fourth time, Joseph said it. God did this. Tell Dad that God was behind it all. He sent me here for the purpose, and he made me a ruler. Tell Dad so that he doesn't blame you. Now, why would he do that? Because Joseph was his dad's favorite. If his dad realized that his sons had sold his favorite son into slavery, how many of you guys think dad would probably be a little bit mad? And so Joseph cut that off and said, tell dad it was God who did it. Now, flip forward 5 chapters of Genesis chapter 50. Their father is dead, and now his brothers are afraid again. Why? Because now that dad is dead, they expect Joseph to finally take revenge and get even. But Joseph calmed them by saying, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then, don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children. Wow. What incredible grace. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. Beaten up, thrown in a well, sold, and sold again, falsely accused, put in prison, left in prison, isolated and alone. God intended all of that for good. He put me here to save you and to save many others. So right now you're probably thinking, okay, Pastor Jason, thanks a lot. Right? The reason that God lets bad things happen to good people is so that other people can be saved. Are you trying to tell me that everything bad that happens to me is God's design? Now I really don't want to serve him. What kind of God is that? Look again at Joseph's words. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. You see, God didn't intend evil for Joseph. What God did do was he took the evil intent of others and he turned it in such a way that would position Joseph for impact and blessing. See, God took what looked like and seemed like a really bad series of circumstances and he used them to make Joseph's dreams come true. And that brings us to our promise today. When you leave, our ushers will have a promise card for you with today's promise on it. This week's promise, Romans 8:28. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Do you believe that? Paul said, in all things. See, that's good things and bad things, evil things, unfair things, horrible things, and great things. In all things, God works for the good of those who love him. See, the reality is bad things happen to good people and bad people and God's people. See, that's a part of life on earth. No one is immune from sickness, heartache, or trouble. But those who love God have a promise. See, when bad things happen, God will use it and turn it for your good and for the good of others. See, even when it looks like life is spinning out of control, God is still working. God is working behind the scenes, orchestrating circumstances on your own behalf. But you say, Pastor Jason, what about death? What about when a good person dies before their time? You see, we get fairly short-sighted when it comes to death. See, the whole point of living for Jesus is to go to heaven. See, when we die, we win. Paul said to live is Christ, to die is gain. See, we mourn and we grieve, but trust me, your loved one, if they've decided to be a lifelong follower of Jesus, they're not grieving and mourning in heaven. They aren't asking God, why did you let this happen? Instead, they are dancing and they are singing and worshiping and praising in the presence of Jesus, and one day we'll be there with them. Why do bad things happen to good people? Because bad things happen in a bad, sin-filled, evil world to good people and bad people. The difference is God ultimately uses the bad things that happen to you to bring about good for you and for others. Did God cause the bad? Absolutely not. But God, you will use what the enemy tried to use to destroy you and to turn it to good in a way that you can never imagine. See, in life's giant challenges and in life's minor inconveniences, God is working for those who love him. I want to share with you a story that I believe illustrates this promise so beautifully. She wrote, I have a condition called hyperhidrosis. It's not dangerous at all unless you let yourself get dehydrated. But basically, it's overactive sweat glands that are usually relegated to certain parts of the body. The palms, the soles, and the armpits are the most common, and mine is pretty severe. I've been to dermatologists and tried everything shy of surgery to correct it to no avail. As I said, it's not dangerous, just embarrassing. As a kid, playing Red Rover or hand clapping games was mortifying. Dating was hard because I had to explain why I dislike holding hands. Meeting new people used to cause me anxiety due to the obnoxious tradition of shaking hands. Why can't we just be weird and kiss each other like they do in Europe? I'm often unable to lay my hands against papers I'm writing or signing as it leaves a handprint. You get the gist. I used to fervently pray, begging God that he would take this away. It should be so easy. I'm not maimed or disfigured. I don't have cancer. But as I prayed and prayed and prayed, nothing happened. I figured there must be some sneaky God plan in place. Fast forward to 2017 when our son was born. I chose to breastfeed him and pump while we were apart, and apparently had an abundant milk supply. Like to the point that our freezer, my mom's freezer, and a second freezer that we bought just for milk were all full. Finally, I discovered a milk bank in Texas that takes donations for medically fragile infants who, for whatever reason, prematurity, genetic defect, etc., can't take formula. Some of the mothers can't produce milk or can't make enough or quit pumping before they realize that it's an issue. So with all of my access, I was able to help out. Fast forward again to 2019 with our daughter. Everyone warned me that the second time around that their milk supply was different. I may not have such a bounty this time. Nope, same thing. And so I reached out to the milk bank sooner, but this time curiosity got the better of me. And so I started researching why I'm so blessed. The very first sentence in the anatomy book that I consulted said mammary glands or modified sweat glands, and it clicked into place. If I had overactive sweat glands, then it stood to reason I had overactive mammary glands. But that's been such a positive thing. And now I want you to listen to her conclusion. She said, so, would God allow me to suffer a minor inconvenience of embarrassment for years before understanding the gift that I'd been given? Yes, I think so. Now as a mother, I can think of no greater honor than to help other mothers feed their valuable babies. Maybe it's just postpartum hormones, but I started tearing up, thanking God for not answering my prayers all those years ago. Or I might not have had the opportunity now. I just wanted to share another example of how God works in great and mysterious ways. You see, it really is true. God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose.
October 27th of 2019, my husband Joel and I were in North Little Rock, and we were visiting First NLR. And early that morning, it was a Sunday morning, I received a phone call. And that was the phone call that you never think in your entire lifetime that you would get. My father-in-law was calling to tell me that the campus we pastor in New York was on fire, and that he could see in the door the building was filled with smoke, and he could see the flames. And he didn't really know much more than that, but he had called 911. at that point, what do you do? And my husband and I, we stopped and prayed. And later we found out that our campus was broken into, and the brand new renovation that we had finished in Easter of 2019 was intentionally set on fire. And it's been about 3 months since that fire took place, and it's been a crazy couple of months. Many highs, many lows. It's been hard, it's been painful, it's been challenging, but at the same time, it's been beautiful, and it's been a journey. And today, 3 months later, I can sit here and say with all confidence that what we have in our building now is truly better than before. And it sounds kind of silly. You would never say, oh my goodness, I'm so thankful that somebody broke into our church and set it on fire. But I can say that that's our story, that we truly are thankful, and that God has done so much more with this tragedy than what we could have ever thought, than what we could have ever imagined, and we're thankful.
See, how many times have we faced hardship or trouble, and we've wondered, where is God in this? How could a loving God allow this? How could God let this happen to me? See, one day, what doesn't make sense now will make perfect sense. And you'll discover that all along God was working and moving and orchestrating things that you couldn't even see. So Jason, are you saying that you believe that God caused the fire at our campus in Hornell? No, I'm not saying that at all. Listen, it might have been a spiritual attack from Satan, because it sure felt like that for Joel and Brittany. See, it might even have been just a natural result of a sin-filled world. But regardless of what it is or where it came from, God turned it around and used it for good. Just 2 weeks ago, after being out of their church for 3 months, they went back in and had their first services in their home campus. And can I tell you, God did a miracle through that. I want to look at Joseph's words one more time. He said, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. See, how was Joseph able to say that? Because years later, Joseph had the benefit of hindsight. Looking back, he could see that God was positioning him to save his brothers. See, God used the bad that his brothers did to put him in a place where he could save them. So Joseph reinterpreted his difficult circumstances in light of where he was now, and he realized all that time God was still in control. He was still working. Even when you tried to destroy me, that couldn't and didn't stop God's plan. Man, what an amazing perspective. You tried to do evil to me, you tried to kill me, but God's response to that evil was to leverage it and put me in a place to save you. God causes all things to work together for the good of those who love him, who are called according to his purpose. You see, it's wrong to see Paul's intent in this verse of it will just work out in the end. Actually, it's kind of the exact opposite of that. It's not random. See, it's not just trying to make sense of a bad situation. If the directed purpose of God, who will use everything in your life for good, it's the directed purpose of God who will use everything in your life for good. So that means that even the most evil, horrible thing, that God will turn it around. I said it earlier. Bad things happen to good people and bad people and God's people. But you see, the difference is how you respond. Here's a powerful way to apply the promise. When you're facing really, really bad things, or even just little things like missed flights, flat tires, sick kids, and mean people, trust God's promise more than your perspective. Isn't that good? Trust God's promise more than your perspective. Man, some of you are on an emotional roller coaster, moving from crisis to crisis, each one knocking you down. And others of you, you give on a regular basis, right? And you give up on a regular basis. And I know that because I see your Facebook post. See, when the next thing comes around, you're ready to quit God and you're ready to quit church. You swing to hopelessness in a moment. And the Lord would say to you today, trust me. I am working for your good. I know it looks bad. I know you don't understand. Hey, it is bad. But don't give up. Don't give in. Don't quit. You may not be able to see it right now, but I am working. What the enemy intends for bad, I'm going to turn around for your good. You are not defeated, and you cannot be defeated because I am your God, and I am working on your behalf. Get your hopes up. Trust me. Watch, and you will see that I will use this for your good and for my glory. See, God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. See, when I was a kid and a teenager, there was a song that I grew up singing, and at the time I didn't really appreciate it. But over the years, I have come to love it and to appreciate it because of its simplistic truth. Will you sing it with me? God is so good. God is so good. God is so good. He's so good to me. God is so good. God is so good. God is so good. God is so good. He's so good to me. Sing it, Raven. See, today I don't know what it is that you're going through. You may be facing a tough situation. You may be facing difficult circumstances that you never thought you'd have to deal with. And the reality, you can't even say right now that God is good because your perspective is right here and all you're seeing is whatever it is in front of you. It might be the diagnosis, it might be something relationally. But can I tell you this morning, what you need is a perspective shift. Listen, when you don't see God working, trust his promises. Why? Because God has never not kept his promises. Not one promise has he made that he's broken. And so even when you can't trust what's going on, even when you don't see that there's anything happening, trust in who he challenges and trust God's promises. Maybe today you're currently in a situation that seems bad, or it is bad. Listen, I want to pray with you. Here's how we're going to pray. We're going to pray that promise over you, and that your perspective will take a turn, and your perspective will shift, and your spiritual eyes will open to the possibility that God can take that situation and turn it for good. Listen, and if this is a spiritual attack from the enemy, then we're going to pray that God frustrates the enemy and turns it to bless you and to protect you and advance the kingdom. If you're facing difficulty right now, I want you to just stand right where you are. Anybody else? If there's somebody standing near you, would you go lay a hand on them, begin to pray this promise over them? And so we're going to come and we're going to pray for you, and we're going to lay hands on you, and we're going to begin to pray out loud, both the people that are there standing with you and the people who are not, and then I am. I'm going to pray over you, and we're going to pray that God will make this promise come true in your life. So right now, begin to pray over that person. God, we come to you right now. God, and we stand on your promise. God, that you work things together for good. God, for those who love you and are called according to your purpose. God, you know the individual situations that people are facing. God, you see diagnoses of cancer. God, you see infertility. God, you see relationships, God, that have been damaged so bad that it seems like there is no good that can come from it, and no way that you could possibly turn it around. God, for some in here, maybe it's a financial crisis. God, and they have tried, but it seems like no matter how much they try, God, things only seem to get worse. God, and they find themselves asking the question, why me? But God, we understand and we know that Jesus said, in this life, you will have trouble. So God, I pray that right now, God, that you would intervene on their behalf. God, we know that you're already moving. God, even when we can't see it, when we can't feel it, God, we know that you are making a way in their life. God, that you are making a way for the impossible to happen. God, we pray for your healing touch in their lives. God, healing of their emotions. God, healings of their soul. God, physical healing. God, we pray that you would make them new. God, we pray that if this is a spiritual attack, one that the enemy is using to try and take them out, God, one to try and defeat them, God, we pray right now, God, that the enemy's plans would not stand and would not prosper. God, I pray that you would frustrate the plans of the enemy. God, that on the other side of whatever this situation is, God, that we'd be able to look at it and we'd be able to have the perspective of Joseph. God, we'd be able to look at it and say, this was what was meant to happen, but God, you intended it for this. God, you intended it for good. So God, I pray right now, God, that you would help us have a shift in perspective.